Today, I'm joined by Scrum.org professional Scrum trainer Duncan Maddox. We are going to take a look at the very first line of the Scrum Guide and see if, between us, we can figure out what it means.
Scrum, noun. A framework within which people can address complex adaptive problems while productively and creatively delivering products of the highest possible value.
Okay, today we are talking about the opening passage from the Scrum Guide, which says Scrum is a framework within which people can address complex adaptive problems while productively and creatively delivering products of the highest possible value. The subject for today is, what does that all mean?
That is quite a mouthful, isn't it? All in all, what we're talking about is something which is simple, a simple framework to help teams deliver things which are complex. And by complex, we mean changing and adaptive. And this is for products and services that we don't perfectly understand at the beginning of the process.
I love this distinction that Scrum makes too between simple, complicated and complex. It's like a subtle distinction, but it describes almost all problems. Simple being known simple steps, complicated being complicated steps but still known, and complex being complex steps which are unknown. There's unknown, there's uncertainty, we don't know exactly what we're going to do. It describes what Scrum's for in that first bit, complex adaptive problems.
Yeah, and of course chaotic there, just to complete all the different parts of the Stacy model. And normally it's quite difficult to think of a chaotic situation, but we're all kind of going through one at the moment.
And is the goal of a chaotic situation to reduce it, to get it back to simply maybe a complex situation and then to downscale it to a complicated situation?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to exert any degree of control over it, absolutely. But that's obviously outside the realm of Scrum. Scrum is really suited to these complex and maybe complicated situations.
Chaos is like panic zone, isn't it? That's where no good comes out of it. Whereas complex is more like your stretch zone. Like you're comfortable, you can do it, but it's not comfortable. Whereas simple is the comfort zone.
Yeah, simple. What were we talking about last time? Making a sandwich, something that you understand, something which is, it just makes you hungry, something which is predictable, something which you can repeat, something which you can plan out perfectly. If you're in that kind of space, you just don't need Scrum.
Because of the overhead, right? Like Scrum's awesome for solving difficult problems, but if you don't have a difficult problem to solve, we don't need that overhead.
And this is one of the things that most teams say when you start off with Scrum. They say, I don't have time for all of your silly meetings. I don't have time for 15 minutes at the beginning of the day. Why are we wasting time having this retrospective where we sit down and discuss our process? And the reason is because in this complex space, it's always a good investment of time just to have that plan to make sure the team are on the same page every day. And at the end of every week or every month or whatever, to have a look at your processes, have a look at your productivity and ask the team, can we improve what we're doing? And if you're doing something simple, you don't need to do that. But in the complex space, you really do. And this is what the whole framework facilitates. It's the continuous improvement of your product and your processes. One of the little phrases which sets my teeth on edge is when people come in saying Agile methodology or Scrum is a methodology, and obviously that's not our understanding.
And Scrum is very clear on this. The Scrum Guide is very definite that it is a framework. It's not a methodology. The PSM1 certification is very clear and tries to trip candidates up by calling it a methodology or a process or all of this other stuff. It's explicitly stated it's definitely a framework.
Obviously, as a Scrum.org professional Scrum trainer, I wouldn't endorse that view that they're trying to trip candidates up. I'd say that they're testing their knowledge. A methodology is a collection of processes, whereas a framework is much more lightweight, a lot less declarative than a methodology.
A framework, I think, too, describes the what. It describes what should happen, compared to, say, methodology, which describes the how. It tells teams, these are the exact steps that you should be followed, and this is how to do them. The Scrum framework describes you should have a retrospective where the team, for example, inspect the things that are slowing them down and adapt their ways of working accordingly. But the framework doesn't say how to do that, simply that is an activity that should happen. It's much more loosely coupled than a methodology.
Yeah, there's very little why and absolutely no how in the Scrum guide. The Scrum framework is really just a starting point. And a lot of people, again, will sort of push back on this and say, well, Scrum doesn't have any technical practices. Scrum doesn't solve all of our problems. And we might say, well, yeah, Scrum doesn't solve any of your problems.
Yeah, no one claimed it did. If you want less problems, Scrum isn't the starting point for you. Scrum is going to give you more problems initially, problems that were already there, which the teams weren't aware of, which is this barrier to entry, this resistance sometimes. The fact that Scrum's going to make your problems visible.
And I think this is one of the early stumbling blocks people have with Scrum. A, they think it's going to solve the problems, and B, when it raises problems, they don't really want to know.
And that concept of a framework, too, ties into creativity. So we're talking about creatively delivering products. A methodology does kind of restrict creativity. It's like a manufacturing line, a methodology. It's repeating the same steps over and over again to get the same results. That's one example of a methodology, for example. Whereas framework gives us this scope for creativity by not describing the how. Much like say we express our product backlog items as user stories, describes the what, not the how, which allows creativity. Scrum itself follows that same idea that we describe the what but not the how to embrace creativity.
We hear the phrase Scrum but quite a lot when teams aren't quite doing Scrum by the book. We're doing Scrum but we don't have Scrum Masters. We're doing Scrum but we're not producing done products. We're doing Scrum but we're not doing sprints. But one of the phrases we tend to use quite a bit is Scrum and. Because it's a framework, Scrum is really your starting point. So you should be doing Scrum and various technical practices, Scrum and Kanban, or Scrum and whatever techniques help you.
And there's a lot of complementary practices that go hand in hand with Scrum in the modern workplace, particularly DevOps. If we want engineering technical recommendations and practices, DevOps sits very happily side by side with Scrum.
Yeah,
and does provide explicit technical recommendations. If you want to be managing your source code, this is one very good way of doing it. DevOps does provide that. Scrum doesn't try and step on the toes of other frameworks.
Yeah, and it does actually say that within the Scrum guide, that the Scrum framework is an excellent container for other agile techniques and practices.
And that's also subtle too. The word immutable is in the Scrum guide, which means Scrum can't be changed. Now we can't be doing Scrum and removing stuff from the Scrum framework, but we can bolt stuff on the outside. We can do more. We can't change the core of it. Otherwise the machine doesn't work. The cogs don't turn. But we can enhance Scrum with other stuff as well. If it works for the team, whatever the Scrum is a starting point. Obviously, going back to this, the saying, the goal isn't to do Scrum. The goal is to be the best team and deliver the most value to our customers. So we can do more stuff. We can add Kanban metrics on top of Scrum. We can implement DevOps practices alongside Scrum and do all of this stuff to flesh it out and to meet the needs of the team. But we can't squish it down. We can't compact it anymore.
And because every part of the framework has value, you take any one little bit out, the whole thing kind of falls apart.
By not doing any of the components, we're missing that opportunity to inspect and adapt something. The Scrum Guide talks a lot about software development. Software in 30 Days was Ken's original book, and it's got this historic association with software. But our phrase here talks about creatively delivering products of the highest possible value. That doesn't just mean software.
Obviously, when Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber put the framework together, then they were working in software. So it was aimed at software, but there's nothing in the framework itself which is intrinsically linked to software. it's linked to complexity. So I've worked with marketing teams. I've introduced Scrum to sales teams, and they've absolutely loved it, because at the end of the day, what Scrum is about is teamwork and collaboration, and giving your teams the ability to inspect and adapt, to do something and try and experiment.
And also comes back to creativity. Scrum can be implemented in any organization that's creative enough to find a way to use Scrum to solve their complex problems. I was working with an organization with 3 different Scrum teams, and they were really struggling to define what their product was when they first put in Scrum. They had this concept that Scrum is for delivering products. What's our product? We spent a lot of time talking about trying to crowbar this concept of a product into what the team does. We ended up reframing that slightly. So the work wasn't a product backlog, but it was a team backlog. It was all the work that the team needs to do to deliver the various services that team needs to deliver. And the product was the sum of all of those services.
The Scrum framework, obviously it changes every few years. I think the next change will reflect this movement of Scrum away from just being software focused towards being complex products and services focused. Scrum is about teamwork. It's about collaboration. It's about innovation. And it can be used in any complex space for delivering any service, any product where you want to be adaptive, where you don't really know what you want at the beginning of the process.
Anywhere where empiricism is going to help, anywhere where raising transparency about what's going on, looking at what's going on, and coming up with a plan, an idea of what to do next to make things better, anything like that. Why is this important? Why have we spent the best part of however long this has been talking about one sentence?
So the reason we've been talking about this in such depth is A, because we've got nothing better to do, but B, it's so important. It's one of the key phrases within the Scrum Guide. Unless you understand the purpose of Scrum, then there's no real point drilling down into the individual components.
And Scrum is a tool. Scrum is a fantastic tool, but it's not the ultimate tool for everything. If all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, that kind of thing. That doesn't mean Scrum isn't the perfect fit for everything. Scrum is a perfect fit for problems within the problem space of this opening line of the Scrum Guide, I think.
Yeah, and when I'm running Scrum training courses, when this comes up, a lot of people find this quite shocking when I say, well, Scrum isn't the solution to every problem. That's one of the moments where I see people suddenly start scribbling and they realize that it's just a tool for a specific problem space.
I think I'd go a bit further and say Scrum isn't the solution to any problem. Scrum is a way to go about solving problems. It's not the solution itself. It's the approach to solving the problem.
It's a framework to allow agility or facilitate agility. And agility is just the way of delivering what your customers want as quickly as possible and allowing you to turn change to your competitive advantage. Right, so I feel that we've talked a lot of words about a very simple sentence in the Scrum Guide.
Yeah, for one sentence, there's a lot of stuff to talk about in there. I think this comes back to this motto of Scrum: easy to learn, difficult to master. It seems relatively straightforward on the subject, but on the surface. But when we start diving into this, each one of these concepts means a lot more than the simple words that describe it. It allows teams to ask the question: is Scrum right for us? Is our way of working, do our problems fit this description of Scrum? And if the answer is no, perhaps Scrum isn't the right framework. If the answer is yes, perhaps Scrum is the most applicable framework.
What I'm taking away from all of this is that the framework is your starting place for teams who are producing products, services, something complex, something where they want to be adaptive, something where they want to take change and turn it to a competitive advantage. And teams which are working in this complex space where they've got a lot of different skills and there isn't any one person who can direct each of them. And when we talk about the Scrum framework, it's a starting place. It's not a solution. The Scrum framework will make your problems transparent and visible. It's up to you to do something about them.
So there we go, the very first line of the Scrum Guide. Lots to think about there. If you found this video interesting, informative, amateurish or downright irritating, please go ahead and click that little like button and have a think about subscribing to the channel. This has been the Scrum Master's Guide to the Galaxy, and we will see you on the next one.
Banter. If we could bottle this.
ScrumChat.
ScrumChat. It's like buff dudes.
Roadhouse.
Does that make sense? I don't know.
No.
No, it doesn't.